Josh Hill was a biology teacher from Southern California. Surfing was his favorite pastime when he wasn't teaching. Even though he loved surfing, it seemed that it didn't always love him back. At least 30 different times when he went surfing over the past decade, he would get sick with a range of symptoms, including rashes, headaches, sinus infections, and stomach ailments. However, he never let a little illness deter him. So early in 2019, near the end of his Christmas break at school, he decided to get one last surf in before getting back to work. He headed down to the beach at Imperial Beach, California, and spent the morning surfing. Within days of that outing, he started feeling ill once again. This time, however, it wasn't the same. He felt physically drained, had a horrible cough, a high fever, shortness of breath, and some chest pain on occasion. One day, he was so physically drained that he just laid down on the floor and couldn't move. Then he started coughing up blood, which obviously is never a good thing. At that point, his wife made him go to the hospital. At the hospital, he was subjected to a battery of tests. Just an FYI, there's going to be a picture of a nasty skin infection in case you want to look away. I will let you know when it is gone. Let me get my... Where are the pictures? There they are. He was eventually diagnosed with an infection of MRSA, or methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. The doctors found that there was a hole the size of a baseball in his left lung. He would remain hospitalized for a week while doctors and nurses treated his disease. The picture of the infection has been taken down now. So how did he get this MRSA? How did he get sick those other 30 times he went surfing? Well, it's most likely that it was due to the sewage and waste that fills the ocean water off the coast of northern Mexico and southern California. This waste, sewage, along with many toxins and chemicals and bacteria, are dumped into the ocean from the Tijuana River. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Jeremy. I am the Everyday Epidemiologist. Today, we will be talking about the Tijuana River sewage crisis. But before we get into that, just a few quick disclaimers. First, this information is being brought to you by me alone as someone who knows a bit about public health and is not coming in any sort of official capacity from the health department where I work. Second, all of this information is all of the information provided in this video. I can't believe I'm stumbling over this. As well. All right, let's start this over. Man, it's a rough morning this morning, apparently. All of the information provided in this video comes from publicly accessible websites, books, and research articles. The sources will be in the description of the video as well as in the pinned comment once this stream is done. Third, I try to provide as accurate and scientifically based information as possible. However, I may misspeak or say something that is incorrect. It does happen. If you do catch me in this, please let me know. I'll leave a comment with what I said wrong, and if possible, a source to the correct information, and I'll look into it. And if I was wrong, I'll provide the correct information in a future video. Lastly, I will stop periodically for questions throughout the stream. However, feel free to type any questions you may have in the chat at any point, and I'll answer them as I see them. If you're watching later on the VOD, please leave your questions and comments in the comment section, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. But with that out of the way, let's get into the Tijuana River sewage crisis. I'll start with just a little bit of information about what the Tijuana River is. It is a 120-mile or 195-kilometer long river near the Pacific coast of northern Baja California in Mexico and California in the United States. It starts up in California, flows down into Mexico, flows through the river or through the city of Tijuana, crosses the border back up into California, and flows through the Tijuana estuary and dumps into the ocean about 10 miles or 15 kilometers south of the San Diego city. The Tijuana River is known as an intermittent river and only flows naturally when it is raining or when during rains, when there's a lot of water from upstream. This river and the river basin is home to the Kumeyaay Nation, a Native American tribe, as well as 2.8 million residents. The Tijuana Estuary is one of California's few remaining salt marshes and is the largest coastal wetland in Southern California. It is home to over 370 migratory and native bird species, as well as other species, some of which are endangered. It is protected by the Tijuana River National Estuarine Research Reserve and is one of 30 such reserves in the United States. They protect, preserve, and manage the natural and cultural resources of the estuary and create opportunities for education and research. This research includes data tracking to better understand coastal ecosystems. Data such as water quality, water flow, rainfall, and animal migration are all tracked. Additional research is performed to better understand the effect of invasive plants, the causes and consequences of hypoxic or low oxygen events in low inflow estuaries, ecological history of the area, and more. This reserve was formed in 1982 and covers 2,293 acres. Did Josh survive? Yes. Thank you for that question, Sarah. Josh did survive. He is fine. He's still surfing to this day and likely still getting sick to this day, but he did survive. I should have mentioned that. Thank you. Good question. In April 2025, the organization called American Rivers named the Tijuana River one of America's most endangered rivers for a second year in a row. This is due to severe pollution and the resulting public health crisis. They state that, quote, the Tijuana River has faced decades of neglect and underinvestment needed to fix broken wastewater treatment facilities and prevent sewage and industrial pollution from being released into the river, end quote. And that's just that's very much an understatement, as we'll get into. This has resulted in, quote, the ecosystem degradation, beach closures, and widespread illness in the communities in and around the Tijuana River Valley, and impacts to tourism and national security, end quote. So how bad is it really? And how did we get here? First, I'll start with a little bit of history of the problem and how we ended up where we are today. Then I'll talk about the current state of the issue. And finally, I'll wrap up with the future of the problem and how people are trying to tackle this issue. But before all of that, let's take a real quick break and see if there are any questions that you may have at this point about the Tijuana River. Sarah, words are hard. They are. They absolutely are. Gwen, I think I picked the wrong time to eat my dinner. If you've got a squeamish stomach, yes, you likely have. It's going to be a nasty episode, unfortunately. It's disgusting. I mean, I knew it was bad when I was working or thinking about doing this episode, but I didn't realize how nasty it was until I started researching it. It's gross. It's really gross. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. Not too surprising, we haven't done too much, so let's just go ahead and get back to it. with how did all this start and why is this a problem in the first place? Let's get the next picture up. Oh, this was should have been before. This is a list of the American rivers, endangered rivers in the United States. Here we go. Now we're on the right picture. The city of Tijuana sits just south of the US-Mexico border and was founded in 1889. By 1900, there were 242 inhabitants in this city. By 1940, it had grown to about 22,000 people. But then it exploded to 60,000 in 1950, 166,000 in 1960, and crossed 1 million people in 1995. As of 2020, the population was about 1.75 million people. But it isn't just the population of the Tijuana city that is causing this issue, but some of the surrounding area that grew rapidly as well, including San Diego County, Imperial Valley, Tijuana, and Mexicali. The population in 1930 was 311,000 people. But by 1960, it grew to 1.5 million and reached 4.5 million in 1995. So as you can see, very, very big, very massive, very rapid increase in human population in this area. As with all cities and human settlements in general, excuse me, waste disposal is something that is very important to prevent the spread of disease. But sometimes a population grows too fast for the infrastructure to be built to deal with it. That is part of what happened here. People were moving to this area and building houses, but sometimes it would take years for safe drinking water and sewage disposal systems to be built. I will talk a little bit more about the history of the waste disposal system and what's being done to fix it a little bit later on. But but now let's get into the scope of the problem. How bad is it? The amount of sewage dumped into the river varies over time and depends on a lot of factors. One of the major factors is being the amount of rain. Increased rainfall causes flooding that overwhelms water treatment plants and causes flooding, which brings trash and other debris into the river. It is estimated that at least 40 million gallons per day of untreated wastewater flows into the river and then out into the Pacific Ocean. I know earlier I called the Tijuana River an intermittent river where it only flows when it rains, and that is partially true. But because of all this untreated sewage being dumped into the river, it flows and reaches the oceans most of the time these days. A report in 2023 by the International Boundary and Water Commission, I'll talk a little bit more about them later, claimed that over 100 billion gallons of untreated sewage, industrial waste, and urban runoff have flowed into the Pacific Ocean via the Tijuana River over the previous 5 years. During large rain events, such as Tropical Storm Hilary in 2023, this amount can reach several billion gallons per day. In 2017, over a 2-week period alone, 143 million gallons of sewage spilled into the Tijuana River. This specific event was caused by a rupture in a sewage collection pipe. Yay. Fun. So what sort of pollutants are in the Tijuana River? Much of it is untreated wastewater or sewage, but there's also trash and sediment from upstream canyons. Tijuana generates about 100 million gallons of sewage per day. A large portion of that does not go to wastewater treatment plants and is dumped directly into the river. Trash from urban areas, when not properly disposed of, can get into the water. This happens at increased levels when rain increases the water flow. Sediments from soil erosion from the canyons flow into the river at high rates during periods of rain. Increased construction and land misuse can exacerbate this as well. In addition to all of this, tests have identified industrial chemicals, methamphetamines, fentanyl, restricted pesticides, pharmaceuticals, and odor-causing sulfur compounds in the river as well. It isn't just the water that's getting contaminated either. The air quality is also affected. A study from August 2025 found that the amount of hydrogen sulfide in the air around the river peaked at 4,500 parts per billion. This is well above the typical urban level of less than 1 part per billion, and far above California's air quality standards of 30 parts per billion. Their model showed a high potential for widespread dispersion of airborne pollutants well beyond the limit of the water pollution. So, how do we know where this pollution is? How do we test for this sort of thing? The San Diego County Public Health Laboratory, U.S. Naval Laboratories, and other private laboratories test water samples to see what is present and where it is. Two of the main indicators for fecal material in the water that they test for are E. coli bacteria and coliform bacteria. When these tests exceed state limits, beaches are closed. Between February 2024 and September 2024, the U.S. Navy tested 192 water samples. 76% of those, or 146 of those tests, exceeded these safe levels. In November 2024, air quality monitoring was established. This is used to help drive public health recommendations, as with the water testing that goes on as well. Additional laboratory tests measure other potential pollutants and contaminants from the water, the ground surrounding the water, and the air in the area. Non-toxic dyes have been added to the water to identify the currents and where the sewage from the river is flowing once it reaches the ocean. You can see a picture of that here. All of these different tests taken from different areas at different times gives us a better idea of what is happening in the water, what toxins are present, and how it is affecting the surrounding area. But what effect does all these chemicals and bacteria and everything actually have? Well, we'll start with the most observable but arguably not the most severe issue. There have been over 1,300 consecutive days of beach closures in San Diego County due to the water being contaminated. That is at least one beach closed because of this issue every day for over 3.5 years. But this came from an article from August 2025, so that's likely even higher now. This is because, as we saw from above, from the last picture, let's go back to it. The water current in this area flows up the coast from Mexico along the land into the United States for a while before heading out to the ocean. I think I have another picture of that later somewhere, maybe. I can't remember. I hope I do. I meant to have a picture of that, but I'm not sure if I actually saved that picture. But if you're curious about the ocean currents, we can look that up. Just let me know in the comments. Yeah, okay. So yeah, the water current flows up into the United States and then flows out to the ocean. This picture here shows the beach closures in San Diego as of this morning, as of the morning of this stream. So as you can see, there are a lot of beach closures even today. A survey conducted in San Diego County in 2024 found that 64.6% of households in the South Bay area reported at least one member who believes that their health has been affected by the pollution coming from the Tijuana River. The most common issues reported were skin rashes, gastrointestinal illnesses, persistent coughs, headaches, nausea, and eye infections. A report from February 2025 by the US Navy showed 1,168 cases of acute gastrointestinal illnesses among US Navy SEALs that are based in San Diego. 457, or 39% of those, were diagnosed within 7 days of being exposed to ocean water that was contaminated with waste from the Tijuana River. A public health professor at the San Diego State University, talking about this studies investigating the health impacts of this pollution, says that 45% of people living near the river experience health problems. 63% report pollution disrupting their work or school, and 94% report smelling sewage in their homes. Overall, it is very difficult to assess the health impacts of the wastewater in the river. Many of them are mild or don't get reported to health departments or other organizations tracking it. It's also difficult to really prove that the illnesses are a direct result of exposure to the waste. So while I can't give you too many actual numbers of health impacts from the Tijuana River sewage, it is likely that a very large number of people in the Tijuana-San Diego region have been affected by this crisis. Beyond the people affected, this pollution is negatively affecting the environment and the wildlife in the area. Sewage introduces high levels of nutrients, bacteria, and toxins into the environment. In this picture, you can actually see the sewage and the waste flowing out of the river into the ocean from space. That brown area where it's labeled wastewater plume, yeah, that's the poop water from the Tijuana River seen from space. Ew. Ew. That's nasty. So gross. So these high levels of nutrients, bacteria, and toxins can lead to algal blooms, which can deplete the oxygen in the water and cause massive die-offs of fish and other marine organisms. Other pollutants commonly found in sewage, like heavy metals and chemicals, can accumulate in the tissues of marine mammals, causing long-term health problems and sometimes negatively impact reproduction. And other animals, not just mammals. These disruptions can not only affect the individuals and species directly affected, but can also destabilize food webs and destroy the ecosystem around them. Not only that, but sometimes people eat these affected marine animals and become exposed to these toxins in that way. The Tijuana estuary has been severely degraded from decades of sewage, chemicals, trash, and sediment being dumped into it. This situation is killing many animals that live there and is destroying their home. So as you can see, this horrible crisis has been going on for decades and has negatively affected the people and the area surrounding the river. Now that you know all this, you may be asking, what are we doing about it? That is a fantastic question, and we'll get into that after a quick break to see what other questions you may have at this point. So, what do y'all have for me at this point? Y'all have any questions about any of this, about any of the sewage, the effects, what's in the water. What do you got? What you got? Yeah, Gwen, it is so much. And Gwen and Sarah, I agree. Ew. It is gross. And it's definitely a problem. Why don't we hear more about this in the news? Uh, that is a good question. We should. We absolutely should. So, at least in the San Diego area, it is in the news a lot. Most of the information that I got for this episode, most of my sources are news articles. It was hard to find a whole lot of research articles and government um, uh, documents. That's the word I was looking for. Government documents. I found some that looked into this, but most of the information came from news articles. So in this area, it's in the news quite a bit, but not as much as it should be, and that's a problem. I think one of the main reasons why we don't hear about this more in the news is because there's lots of other crap that's going on. Lots of other crap that's going on in the news cycle these days. And it's hard to report on everything, and this sort of thing doesn't directly affect people outside the area that's directly affected, the San Diego, Tijuana area. So, you're not going to hear about it in the news in the eastern United States or South America or Europe, Africa, Asia, because it doesn't really affect you all directly. But the problem is, Tijuana River is not the only one like this. There are situations like this all over the world. We are dumping pollution, we are dumping waste, we are dumping trash, we are dumping plastics into the water system, and it is getting everywhere. It is everywhere. This is an issue that should be a bigger issue in the news, and should be an issue that is addressed and dealt with a greater sense of urgency. Let's see. Gwen asks, which authorities are responsible for this from a public health perspective? I almost read that as pH as in, acidity level, but as in responsible for solving the problem or holding accountability. And is the problem lack of regulation or lack of enforcement? Okay, so I'll start with the authorities that are responsible. That's part of the problem, is it's a lot. There are a lot of governmental organizations on both sides of the border that are responsible for this. And as you all, as I'm sure you all know, governments are highly ineffective, and getting different governmental organizations to work together and talk together can be an issue. So getting that collaboration between the different organizations to address this issue can be a problem. But some of them that are responsible for this, at least on the U.S. side, I'm less familiar with the Mexican government side, but the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is obviously a big one. The International Boundary and Water Commission that I mentioned earlier, that I'll talk a bit more about later, they're one of the big organizations that involves both the U.S. government and the Mexican government to address this issue and other issues like this on the U.S.-Mexican border. But yeah, so there's quite a few governmental departments and organizations that are responsible for this, and it falls through the cracks a lot of times. And as Sarah says, a lot of passing the buck. Absolutely. And is the problem a lack of regulation or lack of enforcement? Yes, both. It's also a lack of monetary support to build and upkeep the infrastructure, as we will actually talk about here shortly. That is one of the biggest issues is there's just no money or not enough money put into building and maintaining the wastewater treatment facilities that are needed. Um, but there is a lot of lack of regulation, especially on the Mexican side of things, where regulations are a bit looser. Um, but there are people, as I'll talk about later, that are trying to address at least some of the regulation and enforcement of those regulation issues. Great questions. Thank you. Thank you. Those are fantastic questions. Are there any other questions that you have at this point? Anything else before we get into what's being done? Well, I'm not seeing anything right now, but if you have any questions as we go, put them in and I'll answer them as I see them. So, what is being done about this waste? What have we tried so far? And what have we tried historically? Um, and I just wanted to give you a quick FYI. I couldn't find many actual pictures of historical sewage treatment attempts. So some of the pictures you see in this next section are not the actual facilities, but other similar or related sewage treatment facilities. But in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there wasn't anything done. Nothing was done to deal with the sewage. The waste was just allowed to flow into the river and out into the ocean. But by the 1930s, growing concern about this sewage pollution led to investigation by the International Boundary Commission, which later became the International Boundary and Water Commission. And this investigation happened in 1934. Their investigation, led to the creation of the International Outfall, which is a pipeline that discharges wastewater into the ocean and was built in 1939. So it's something sort of similar to the picture that you're seeing now, except it dumps out like further out towards the ocean. This is not the exact one, but again, it's a one similar to this. So this was built in 1939, but even by the late 1940s, this system was inadequate to deal with the sewage produced in Tijuana, and the sewage kept being dumped into the river. And over time, the situation kept getting worse, and health problems became more and more frequent. So Mexico tried a fix. They tried to add chlorine to the wastewater before it was sent to the outfall. Not exactly the best remedy, if you ask me. By the 1960s, the situation was so bad that the San Diego County health officer said he couldn't keep people in Mexico from flushing their toilets, but he could declare a public health problem and keep people in San Diego from crossing the border into Mexico. This threat to their tourism, finally caught the attention of the governments. Finally, in 1961, a pumping plant, 1961 or 1962, depending on which source I saw both, a pumping plant was built. This wasn't a great fix either because it didn't treat the sewage, but instead it just pumped it into the Pacific Ocean. But even that was a temporary fix, as it broke several times in the 1960s and in the 1970s. Finally, in the mid 1970s, it broke completely. So another attempt in the 1960s to deal with this was 15 million gallons per day, or at the time about 75% of Tijuana, 15 million gallons per day, I'm not sure if I said that, or about 75% of Tijuana's sewage that they created at the time was pumped up to San Diego to be treated. This was done just as an emergency stopgap until better fixes could be made. But it did help the problem a little bit. Finally, some actual progress was made in the 1980s when a clean water grant from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, was awarded to create the San Diego Tijuana Wastewater Treatment Plant, now called the South Bay International Boundary Wastewater Treatment Plant. This plant cost $239 million in 1980s dollars or 1990s dollars when it was actually built. Completed in 1997, it was able to treat 25 million gallons per day of sewage from Tijuana before discharging that treated water 3.5 miles offshore. This was a big increase in the wastewater treatment, but it still wasn't enough to treat everything coming out of Tijuana. The maintenance costs for this plant are shared by the US and Mexican governments. But unfortunately, that sentence is kind of out of place, isn't it? Anyway, unfortunately, this plant doesn't meet the requirements set by the Clean Water Act because there is no secondary treatment of the water. It only does a primary treatment. So it's still not completely treated and completely clean water. As of 2010, secondary treatment was planned for the future, pending final alternatives assessment. I don't know if any progress has been made on this front since then. I have not been able to find any information about that. Across the border in Mexico, a new pumping plant called the Planta de Bombeo CILA was built in the 1990s as well. This plant was used to reclaim contaminated water from the Tijuana River, pump it out of the river, and pump it up to these treatment plants. Unfortunately, it wasn't a very good fix either. The original pipes were, at the time it was built, already too small to handle all of the waste water coming out of the river, or going into the river. And also, it became frequently clogged with garbage because it was so small. This required typically just one person, to be on watch and to be responsible for cleaning the trash away from the pipes. I'm sure you can guess how effective that was. As recently as 2020, the drains became clogged with trash 9 times over a 3-month period. And obviously, if these pipes are clogged, no wastewater is getting into the pumping station and is therefore not being pumped up to the wastewater treatment plants. So it's just flowing into the river like normal. So yeah, great solution there. Having a lot of impact. Yay. Yet another wastewater treatment plant was built in Mexico in 1988, known as the San Antonio de los Buenos, or the SAB for short. The problem with this facility, besides the fact that it doesn't treat too much wastewater sewage, is, again, it also only does primary treatment and not secondary treatment, so it doesn't meet safety standards either. And unfortunately, maintenance and repairs on this facility were not kept up as well as they should have been. The plant stopped working altogether in 2020. After several years, finally, repairs began. So it was completely non-operational for, I think, about 4 years before they started working on repairs. But we'll talk a bit more about that later. So this graphic here, up here, is a graphic of the different pumping stations and the different sewage treatment facilities that are in use today, or, in repairs today. So in summary, so far, up to about 5 to 10 years ago, we have tried several wastewater treatment plants and pumping stations taking some wastewater out of the river and sending it to these treatment plants. By the late 1810s and 1820, Many of these facilities were either non-functional or unable to keep up with the demand. So, what's been done over the past 5 years? Well, some, but honestly, not enough. So, let's get into that. In 2019, the US Mexico Canada Agreement trade deal included $300 million to deal with this issue. Some of this $300 million would come from the US, some would come from Mexico. Most of this money would go to expanding and upgrading the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. Finally, in 2025, 5 years later, 6 years later, these upgrades were started. They were expected to take 2 years to complete, but there was actually some political push, and these upgrades were able to be finished in just 100 days. And now, the plant can handle 35 million gallons per day, which is up from 25 million, which is great. Still not enough, but it's an improvement. There is a goal to increase the capacity to 50 million gallons per day by the end of 2027. That'll help as well. Also in 2025, the SAB repairs were finally completed, and that facility was finally brought back online after being down for 5 years. Repairing these facilities is great and is helping, but it isn't enough. In 2024, the Tijuana River Trash Bloom Project installed trash booms, or a trash boom project. Not bloom, I mistyped that and I read why I typed. The Trash Boom Project installed trash booms or barriers to collect debris flowing into the river before it reaches the ocean. The picture here shows some of these trash booms. They stretch about 700 feet across the beginning of the Tijuana River Valley. During the first rainy season, this system collected about 500 tons of trash. In the first 2 months of the second rainy season last year, and starting the rainy season of 2025 into 2026, it has already collected about that same amount. This is really gross when you realize that all of this trash used to just flow right into the Pacific Ocean. But it's fantastic that now it doesn't. And again, it doesn't catch all of the trash, but it does catch a lot, which is awesome. The EPA, the International Boundary and Water Commission, and the Mexican government met in 2025 to work to deliver a, quote, 100% solution to the crisis. This agreement includes assurances that Mexico will fulfill its $93 million obligation over the next 2 years. They also agree to accelerate the timeline of repairs and upgrading water treatment infrastructure, and work to develop at least 12 new actions and projects to try to permanently end this crisis and future-proof it against further increase in wastewater production. In the meantime, efforts are being made to help protect the community from poisoned air. 10,000 home air purifiers have been distributed with the goal of getting one into each of the 40,000 homes in the Tijuana River, or in the area of the Tijuana River that are affected by this crisis. This is not being done by any government. This is being done by a non-governmental organization, by a charity. Private organizations and non-governmental organizations are working to remove waste tires that are being exported to Mexico only to be washed back into the river. Efforts are being made to help protect the lifeguards and other public workers that are being exposed to this pollution on a daily basis in the course of their work. Still others are working to push legislation to regulate pollution by California companies that are operating through subsidiary factories in Mexico where regulations are looser. That gets back to your question, Gwen, about regulation and enforcement. So there are people that are trying to work on that. There are lots of people fighting the good fight on a number of fronts to try to alleviate the immediate effect of this disaster, as well as ending it from being a problem altogether. So, where does this leave us today? Well, things are obviously better than they were with these two facilities back online and now upgraded, but it's still not good. Even with these, it is estimated that up to 40 million gallons per day of untreated wastewater, industrial waste, and trash flow out of the Tijuana River and into the Pacific Ocean. This continues to cause beach closures and illnesses. Until there is enough political drive and monetary support on both sides of the border, this problem will continue. It seems, to me at least, that over the past few years, this is slowly starting to happen. I have hope, a little hope at least, that this problem can and will be solved, and hopefully won't be a problem for the next 20, 30, or 40 years. In order to get there, we need to keep pressure on these governments. So if you live in Mexico or the US, be sure to write or call your representatives, call these governmental departments, and tell them about this important issue and urge them to address it quickly. And with that, I will stop and take any other questions you may have. So what questions about the Tijuana River sewage crisis and the attempts to fix it do you have that I have not already answered? Anything? Anyone got anything? Any other questions that haven't been already addressed? No? Not seeing anything. I'll give it another minute or so, see if there's anything that anyone thinks of. And again, if you think of questions later, feel free to put them in the comments section of the video, and I'll answer them. Well, I don't see any questions, so I'll just wrap up. Thank you all very much for joining me today and listening to me talk about this smelly, disgusting, horrible public health problem in the San Diego and Tijuana area. This situation really shows some of the diverse jobs and fields that work in public health, as I talked about in the last episode. But in the next episode, I'll be talking about avian influenza or bird flu. This will be an interesting one, so be sure to be there. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel here on YouTube so that you won't miss any future episodes, and follow me on Bluesky where I share lots of disease and public health information and news between episodes. You can find the link to that in the description. So stay healthy, stay happy, and remember, public health is for the good of everybody. I'll see you next time.